So I'm trying to press record. Is there anybody that wanted to get recorded or don't want to be recorded? Let me know. Okay. All right. Welcome to session number 6, the last session of the day in room 14. As Amy already mentioned, this is fostering change for foster youth support diverse learners, and this is a slight different from most of our session, which are math. So with us, we're very glad to have Amy Ray Foss, is a current senior manager with TNTP, an organization with a mission to end the injustice of educational inequality by providing excellent teachers to the students who needs them most, and by advancing policies and practices that ensure effective teaching in every classroom. She is currently a SAGE and System Fellow with Teach for America Nevada, where she has been navigating complex system within Clark County to understand the challenges, the graduation rate gap. As a former foster parent, classroom teacher, current volunteer, and foster youth advocate, she continues to fight for new realities for all students with focus on multilingual learners and foster youth. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Amy Ray Foss for this session. Take it away, Amy.
Thanks so much, Mike. I appreciate it. And thanks y'all for being here. Some of y'all names are familiar from previous sessions, and so happy to see y'all again. And again, just our session is fostering change for foster youth in Nevada schools. And for those of you who are able to, would love to see faces. I know we're making it to the very end of the day, and so if you're with us and you're able to have your camera on, would appreciate it, just so that we can see who we're interacting with, at least as much as possible. If you do not want your camera on or don't feel comfortable having your camera on, totally understand. But especially when we're going into those breakout rooms, still trying to engage as much as possible for the experience of everyone. And with that being said, I think the main thing I just want to reiterate from the bio that Mike had shared is I'm really coming from a space of advocating for foster youth. And while I do work for an education nonprofit that has had sessions previously today, that is not what brings me to this space specifically. It's more so my heart and the work that I've done in supporting foster youth. And so very much want to name that the reason for being here is for us to collectively think through and imagine different situations and to raise awareness. But by no means do I see myself as a full expert, because I think even state experts would name that there's a lot to learn about this topic. So again, I go by Amy Ray. I use she, her, aya as my pronouns. My current role is a senior manager at TNTP, but really see myself as advocating for youth in various settings. And I just named my reason for choosing the session. And so would love for y'all just to drop into the chat the name you go by, pronouns if you'd like to share your current role, and then your reason for choosing this session specifically. So there were 16 different choices for your time this afternoon. And so what brings you into this space? And you can drop that into the chat. Thank you, Jennifer. And thanks for your work as a former foster parent as well. School counselor is great. Thank you all for sharing these intros. All right, keep those coming. Thank you. Definitely wide experiences and perspectives coming into this space, but we will quickly learn just to what extent this impacts everyone. And then I will go ahead and go to our next slide, which is just checking your awareness. So this, because I'm not able to pre-set up polls in Zoom, wanted to at least have a way to gather some initial data from y'all before I jump in. And I do want to name that this entire slideshow will be available to you in just a minute, but wanted to gather your information here first. So I'm going to pause sharing my screen for a second, or just hold it on this screen. So go ahead and take a moment. I'm going to give everybody a minute to put in what initial thoughts and awareness you have related to foster youth in Nevada. There are no right or wrong answers here. This is 100% just to gather some baseline data of what people in this space already know and are familiar with. Give you all one more minute. And once you've submitted that, Mike has also dropped the attendance link in the chat for y'all to fill out. Thank you to our first 2 people who have submitted their baseline data. Love it. Have responses from 8 of y'all. Now I've got half of y'all. And again, once you've filled that in, make sure you do your attendance. I want to make sure that you get all of your credit for being here as well. Okay, I'm going to move us forward. And if you have not yet hit submit, don't change any of your responses now, but I'm going to go ahead and drop in our chat 2 different resources. So the slides are the first resource. So everything that I'm about to go through is in the PDF of the slides, but also the link to the Nevada report card for any of y'all who were in the opening keynote. These are the same statistics that were shared this morning around the Nevada as a whole, glance of graduation rates, chronic absenteeism, etc. And so we can see there what the state's graduation rate is as far as being at 81%. But then we can see that graduation rates for students not ever in foster care in that same year was actually 82%, so slightly higher. And our students who were ever listed in foster care, their graduation rates this past year were 46.9%. And so when we're thinking about the discrepancy between 82% and 47%, but some years it's been even less, you'll see a few years ago it was 43%, 44%, while simultaneously in the state it was still hovering around 82 to 84%. And so we can see that there's a huge gap there in graduation rates for foster youth. Another data statistic that I'll share with you is transiency rates. So in Nevada, we already know that there's a pretty highly mobile population, but specifically for students who are in foster care, they usually move 1 to 2 times a year. And by the time they're out of the system, 1/3 of them have made 5 or more school changes. I recently met with the foster care liaison in Clark County school districts, and he said their school district stats are that students in foster care usually move 3 times a year across schools within the same county. And this data in the paragraph is from 2016. And so again, it's shifted over time, but when we're thinking about transiency and we're thinking about that chronic absenteeism rate, a lot of that is also very much impacting and impacted by our foster care youth in the system. We also know that foster youth are more than 3 times as likely to be suspended. In a statistic in California, 3% of non-foster students were suspended and 12.6% of foster youth students were suspended. So that was a 4 times as high rate. Nevada actually does not track by demographic. And so the 3 times as likely was an estimate provided by the Clark County School District liaison for foster care. But as far as statewide data, we don't actually even collect that as a state. In Clark County, approximately 40% of foster youth have IEPs or 504s. As a national statistic, 30 to 80% of students probably would qualify for an IEP or 504 in foster care. But again, a lot of times they're not identified because they're moving schools 5 times. And y'all probably know, if you've had any experience in a school or a school district or a classroom, every time a student moves, they have to restart that process over again a lot of times because of tracking through the MTSS process. Through a research that was done again back in 2016 and 2017, you can see that the percentage of non-foster care versus the percentage of students with foster care with an IEP is almost 3 to 4 times as high, depending on the year. Foster youth are likely academically performing much lower than their peers, 16 to 20% below. You'll see the GPA rates for students who are not in foster care in 11th and 12th grade are a full to 1.5 points higher than a student who's been in foster care. From a assessment rate or a proficiency rate, we know that they're oftentimes like much lower than their peers. Yes, Kayla, many impartial IEPs and outdated paperwork. Probably true for most student demographics, but when we're thinking about changing schools, when we're thinking about maybe not having someone who can sign off on some of that paperwork, or having a hard time getting a hold of a family member or parent or a guardian, like that just becomes even more magnifying and difficult. The Children's Advocacy Alliance has reported that different subgroups in foster youth are also at higher risk because they have more than one intersectionality that may make it difficult. So we know that Black students in general often have lower graduation rates. And so the graduation rate for Black foster youth was 34%. And for foster youth who had an IEP, the graduation rate was 33% in the 2018-2019 school year. Only 1 in 5 children in foster care will attend college, and this is nationwide, and only 1 in 50 will graduate college. But when we're zeroing back to even our space in like the K-12 space, we're basically saying if a student enters foster care and is within a Nevada school, they're more likely to not graduate than graduate, since the graduation rate is below 50%. And so basically, if you've entered foster care as a student, your chances of not graduating are much higher. And so that is a reality for students who are in foster care. And so I spent the last year really looking at Clark County School District's data and noticed that we're talking about a huge graduation gap, and it is the biggest graduation rate gap of any tracked demographic. So we know that students who are multilingual learners, we know that students who across different racial lines, across different socioeconomic statuses, etc., are all having lower rates of proficiency in graduation, but students who enter foster care are the least likely to graduate of any tracked demographic. And so with all of that data in mind, it's a lot, and I know that it's a lot. I've spent a lot of time looking at the data, and it makes me both really sad and really angry. But I want to give us a chance to react to that. And I want us to first react independently. And so I'm going to go ahead and share a Jamboard. And in that Jamboard, you'll see this emotions wheel. And there are both exclamation marks and question marks. And I'll actually go to it here. And so go ahead and on the first slide, either take an exclamation mark. If you're like, I know this is how I'm feeling and I'm feeling it strongly, you can take a question mark if you want to kind of, if you're not sure exactly how you're feeling, that's totally fine. But go ahead and place it on the wheel where you feel like you are currently in thinking about that data. So thank you to the 6 of y'all who have joined me. So again, the Jamboard is in the chat. I have about half of y'all with me in the Jamboard right now. Thank you for moving yourselves. Yeah, seeing lots of anger, lots of sadness. Also the end of the day. So, and there you have had a lot of sessions today. There might be a lot of different feelings happening within you, around you. Another thing that I had put up here was just a quote around dissociation, and knowing that that's like a very common response for children, but also just want to name it here because I do think that sometimes looking at this data based on your own experience, based on experience you've had with foster youth, can re-trigger some of that trauma. And so I want to name that as well. And so just take care of yourself during the session as you need to, but also want to name that we're going to move beyond this in the session and think about what is possible to bring some hope and optimism back to this space, because I do think that that's really important, which is why we're starting with this data, but moving on from the data. And so now I'm going to give you 2 additional options for reactions. So you'll notice that the second page of the Jamboard is what data stands out to you most and what are you sitting with. And so if you are someone who wants to independently reflect, then you can take a Post-it note or a sticky note. Those of you who have used Jamboard, it's on the side. For those of you who have not, in the little icons on the left, there's one for a sticky note, and you can use a sticky note and share like what data is sticking out to you, what are you sitting with. For those of you who process verbally and want to process with some other people, I am going to open a breakout room for that. And for those of you who are wanting to process independently, but not even in a Jamboard and just need a moment to walk away, to breathe, to take care of yourself, to reflect in your journal, whatever it might be, I'm going to give us 3 minutes and you can choose the space that makes the most sense to you. And so again, I am going to open up 2 breakout rooms. You can choose to be in the room if you'd like to. If you want to independently, reflect, you're welcome to in the Jamboard or separately. Otherwise, down at the bottom of your screen, you should now have the breakout room option, and you can click on that and choose to go in to join room 1 or room 2 if you want to process with other people. And if you need technical help, please let me know. I'm happy to help, whether that's on Jamboard or getting into a breakout room. I do see one person moved into room 2 who would like to verbally process. So if there's someone else in this space who would be open to verbally processing with someone. Thanks to those of you who are who are adding to our Jamboard. Yeah, definitely seeing a lot, both about the graduation rate, but then also related to IEPs. Some good questions as well, definitely things to think about. Melissa, apologies that you were in a breakout room by yourself. I know you went there likely to verbally process with someone. I think everybody was independently choosing to process. So apologize that you were there by yourself.
It's fine. I don't have Jamboard on this, so I was trying to upload it. So I didn't want to waste
Oh.
time. So I went to the breakout room and then okay.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, if you just so you know, if you ever want to participate via the chat instead of Jamboard, since Jamboard's not available on the device you're using, that's totally fine as well.
Thank you.
Does anybody want to share anything that they're sitting with as a whole group? I want to give you space to do that if you feel like you want to or need to. Okay. So real quickly, just want to share again, like what I've done as part of the fellowship that I've been in. So the purpose of the fellowship is around trying to innovate and think of something different within the community. So realizing a need and trying to do something about it. Again, as a former foster parent and still in touch with those foster youth who are now adults, really just thinking about like what could we be doing differently in schools to support them in their graduation. And so I went ahead and developed a theory of action around both raising awareness and then shifting supports for teachers and systems to really decrease the gap between foster youth and non-foster youth graduation rates, to have higher social economic mobility for youth who have been in foster care. I was focused on Clark County School District, and so spent a lot of time building out like a stakeholder map and who is involved in a foster youth's life. And there's a ton of different people who they may come into contact with at any given time. And some of them are within CCSD in the school, but there's also, as some of you noted, some of that is the social services programs. Some of that is some of the nonprofits. I saw that one of y'all mentioned Hannah's Closet in the resources. And so there are definitely a lot of different resources and wraparound services. However, not all students know how to access them, and not all teachers or schools know how to access them either. And so I did some gathering of data very similar to the survey that y'all took, of 70 teachers within Clark County School District. And from that, noticed that only 10% to 30% of people knew both the regular graduation rate and then the graduation rate of students in foster care, or could even identify like the percent range. And like less than 30% of educators knew who was in foster care. Only a quarter of educators felt like they were aware of trauma-informed practices, and less than 30% could even name one organization that supports foster youth. So again, really wanting to lean into how are we building awareness of who's in our class, of what we can do and how to do it. And so that's where we're going to spend the rest of our time today. And so I have a ton of different resources that are linked in the slides themselves. And so I'm just going to drop the link to the slides one more time, rather than every single one of these next slides is going to be a link. And rather than sharing each link in the chat separately, just going to reshare the slides here with y'all. Nope, not that link. Sorry, y'all. My other screen, give me just a second. I just want to make sure that everybody has access to these resources. And for those of you who are following along on the slides themselves, we are now going to be on slide 24. And let me reshare. All right, so as far as the resources, so the first one that I have here to share with y'all is a PDF that, especially if you're a district or a school leader, this might be something to read through because it does talk about some system changes that are possible, but also recaps a lot of data around supporting foster youth. Another really important thing to be aware of, which especially those of you who mentioned have worked with foster youth, who have a background in school counseling, etc., like you're probably very aware of the 10 ACEs, but those ACEs are going to drive a lot of what I talk about next. So ACEs are the adverse childhood experiences. There are 10 possible adverse childhood experiences that children can face, and we know that most children have experienced at least one ACE, but foster youth are often experiencing many of them simultaneously. And so what that means is, like, how are we supporting their trauma and really helping them to come to terms with the trauma that they've experienced? And so even the Nevada Union has resources related to building awareness around ACEs, and that's linked on that slide. There's also a researcher who's done a lot of work around the 7 C's, which are all about resilience. So even if you're not working directly with foster youth, resilience is something that's important for all students, but especially for students who have experienced ACEs, and especially for students who have ever been in foster care. And so thinking through how might you use those 7 C's. I'm not going to make us watch this video right now, but there is a video included there. So trauma-informed care really is like helping understanding or awareness, recognizing the effect of it, training folks on it. And so I think another thing, as I had mentioned in the data that I had looked through, a third of teachers don't even feel like they know how to support students who've experienced trauma, but we all know we have students in every classroom who've experienced trauma. And so making sure teachers know how to support students with trauma, but then school leaders, school counselors, district leaders, etc., and like making sure that programming is actually reflective of that and integrating that knowledge into all policies, procedures, practices. As I had mentioned previously, we know their suspension rates are higher for foster youth. We know their absenteeism is higher. And if we're thinking about those suspension rates, those trauma-informed care and like restorative practices are really, really important to help decrease that. There's actually new legislation this year that has gone out in regards to expulsion and suspension of kids who have ever been in foster care. And so that has been something that's been pushed out to districts. But in order to like get to that point, we also need to make sure that teachers, school leaders, etc., have the resources and the training that they need to make their classrooms and their schools a different place. So thinking about if you take a phone or a backpack from a kid who's in foster care, like that may be their only possession or their only contact with their birth family and whatever it might be. And so sometimes also just recognizing like a kid's response to something is often a result of the trauma they're experiencing or have experienced. So not asking like, why is a child doing this, but more so like what's happened to this child that is causing this reaction or response. And then UNLV along with Clark County School District and Vegas PBS actually do have a 4-part series around building trauma-informed schools. And so there's video resources there. There is a organization called empathic instruction. But again, the idea of that is really just how are we building restorative practices and how are we building empathy into our teaching and our learning. And so on this slide is linked both a blog post with an interview as well as the organization itself. I have no connections to empathic instruction. Again, I'm just sharing resources. Recognizing and treating child traumatic stress. There's a ton of resources here around like, what are the types? How does it show up? What could we do to help? How do we treat it, etc. And then one of my favorite resources is Beacon House. So Beacon House has a ton of different resources. It is based in the UK, but trauma shows up the same no matter what country you're in. Trauma might look different, might sound different, and yet the science behind it and the way to support it is very similar. And so we have resources related to developmental trauma, but there's a specific section in Beacon House's resource library, which is trauma and attachment in the classroom. Which includes a Becoming a Trauma Sensitive School resource bank, which is tons of reading resources, videos, podcasts. And so depending on your learning style, depending on your access to resources, there's tons of opportunities there as well. And lastly, there is the Nevada Department of Ed page on foster care, and the resources tab over on the side includes additional resources in supporting foster youth. I've had consistent contact with Sarah Thomas at NDE. She's always open to talking to schools and districts. I know she talks to the foster care liaison in Clark County and Washoe County very regularly, but she's very willing to talk with school leaders as well. I've met with Laura in thinking about how do we change the reality of students who not only are they not graduating from high school, but we know that foster youth are graduating college at a 1 of 50 rate. And so how are we changing those outcomes in Nevada? So those conversations are happening, but we need as many people as possible in that conversation to make any type of difference. And so want to return back to our Jamboard. I by no means am the smartest person in the room, and I do not have all the answers. I am very much learning with and alongside y'all. I have done a lot of learning around the data and the resources, and again, like my perspective is one perspective, and so want to elevate that some of y'all have additional resources and ideas as well. So first, I want us to be on the Jamboard page that says resources. What resources are you aware of? And again, I'll drop this link in the chat. So we're on slide number 3. What resources are you aware of? Some of y'all, it might be slide 4, but it's the one that says, what resources are you aware of? Thank you to whoever just joined and added the harbor. Go ahead and add additional resources. And this can be anything. This could be student surveys. This could be like, maybe you have a spot in your classroom that you use. What are the different strategies or resources that you may use or have access to? Maybe there's a book, maybe there's a podcast. Melissa or anyone else who does not have access to the Jamboard, feel free to drop it in the chat. Awesome that there's a foster care plan for each foster student. For those of you who have done trauma-informed training or practices, if there's any specific resource or organization that you know of that you would recommend, feel free to add those as well. Go ahead and continue adding resources as I go to the next slide. So what can we do? Again, I mentioned just partnering with others. I've been having a lot of biweekly and monthly calls with different stakeholders and organizations and contacts within the Nevada Department of Ed or school leaders. Another thing is being able to, while some teachers are like, well, I don't know who my foster youth are. For one, it doesn't necessarily matter if you know exactly which kids are in foster care, because again, we're recognizing that a lot of students face a lot of different types of trauma, but there are some key indicators. So first of all, like if there are spikes in attendance or decreases in attendance, so again, back to that chronic absenteeism, that transiency, that can be an indicator of students who might be in foster care or may need additional support. Again, changes in enrollment, knowing that they're moving from school to school to school. Sometimes kids who are left over, so like if they're left after school, they're not being picked up consistently. That can be an indicator. There is an indicator in Infinite Campus. Yes. And that will show if they've been in foster care, but it does not include if they're in kinship foster care, which means that they're living with family members. But that is another place that does indicate it here in Nevada. Also supporting students academically. So someone had noted making plans for those who are in foster care. Really high quality tier 1 instruction is important for all students, but then thinking about those other additional supports in tier 2, tier 3. And you can have an academic plan for any student, whether they have an IEP or a 504 anyway. And so since we had looked at that data and had talked about how a lot of kids in foster care do not have the ability to go through that IEP or 504 process or have the supports to back that up, we can definitely be thinking about how we might make those academic plans regardless of whether or not they've been formally given a plan, and respond and making sure we're tracking that response to intervention. We know that trauma leads to very low frustration tolerance and some toxic stress, which a lot of the resources around ACEs will talk about. And so thinking about how that shows up behaviorally and then how are we responding to that? But then also the academic challenges and the gaps in learning. So a student who's moved schools 5 times or missed 30 days of school or, is at a different school every year, maybe has moved homes 3 to 4 times, they're going to also likely have large gaps of learning in core content area and other content areas. And so thinking about how you're supporting that. And just in reviewing the data, knowing that data doesn't tell the whole story. And so really asking questions and initiating conversations around it and having those conversations sooner rather than later so that the problem is diagnosed and we're moving forward. And that's both at a classroom level, a student level, a classroom level, a school level, a district level, which is what we're here to talk about. And so want to spend some time imagining possibilities together. And I'm going to go ahead and open breakout rooms. There is a Jamboard page specifically for what ideas do you have? So that's slide number 4. But this is something we're going to spend some time doing collectively. And this is also an opportunity to debrief both the data and the resources and share them together. So I'm going to open up breakout rooms. I'm going to try to make them so that there's enough people in the room that you should have some folks who are able to fully participate. For those of you who don't have access to Jamboard, this is a great opportunity to have someone who can take notes for your group. And there you go. You can go ahead and go into those rooms and share with each other what you're taking away and then what additional ideas that you have. For those of you who are still here in this space, does anybody need help? Erin, Amy, Kimberly, Monica, do y'all need any help moving into those spaces? Amy, Kimberly, or Monica, just checking in. Feel free to send me a chat if, oh, yes, Monica, let me go ahead and you should be moved or get a new invite. Do the same. Welcome back, y'all. We have 2 of the rooms back. I'm just waiting on one more room that looks like they're still talking. So they will be back in about 15 seconds. All right, and that last room is here. Would love to have 1 or 2 folks share any ahas, any ideas that you would like to voice to the entire group.
Well, I'll share that my group was
Thank you.
very surprised. You're welcome. That we actually do have foster care plans, and I thought that was a thing for the entire state of Nevada, that we were supposed to be writing foster care plans for all of our students in foster care. As a school counselor, I know I've written them for my foster kids, and this year they really pushed us in our meetings to talk to teachers more in depth about it.
Thank you for sharing that, because I do know from talking with some other local teachers here in Clark County that it varies from school to school. And so first of all, appreciate that you're consistent with that and talking with teachers about it. And I think that's a great thing for people to be consistent about. One other person who would like to share.
We had loaded a bunch of stuff onto the Jamboard, but definitely what she mentioned, the communication within the school system, so that all the staff members know what resources are available to them and what we've done and haven't done for the student. But I personally have noticed that a high turnover within like the actual county system causes a lot of trouble for my students. I have a student this year that she just got her social worker in June, and she got her educational advocate in, I think, July or maybe the beginning of August. They don't know her at all. Her the only person that's been consistent in her life has been her medical representative, and he doesn't even listen to her. And so she's in this spot where her family is not consistent, and her actual, state representatives are inconsistent. And so it's tough. That puts the school system in a tough spot where, one, we don't even know who to contact. When I tried to call her social worker, she's like, I'm not her social worker. And I went through 2 more before I found the one that actually was her social worker, and so that high turnover rate creates a lot of instability as well.
Thanks for naming that, Kayla. Honestly, it is so sad and disheartening to think about their experience, and thinking about the thousands of kids who are in foster care across the state, and each of them having their own experience. And it might look like that, it might look different, it might be even worse than that. And so thinking about how are we showing up for kids, and how might we change that experience moving forward. Thank you for elevating that. And so just wanted to also acknowledge, there are a million things that matter when we're thinking about the grand scheme of life. But when we're thinking about even our classroom, our schools, our students, there's a lot of components to that. And there are a lot of things that we can and cannot control. And so thinking about what's the sweet spot of your specific position that you're in and your locus of control. Unfortunately, we're not all in a space where we can control all of those different system nuances. And so thinking about what's within your control, what might matter to the students in your classroom, and thinking about that as your next step. And so we are going to close up here in the next few minutes, because I know although the session goes till 4:10, the closing starts at 4:10, and I want to make sure that y'all are there on time. And so in our Jamboard, we have again, one more slide at the end of like, how are you feeling now? So on slide number 5, similarly, we have exclamation marks and question marks. Would love for you to share like, how are you feeling now toward the end of the session? And if it's exactly the same, if you're just as angry, if you're just as sad, if you're just as, you know, disgusted or surprised, like totally fine. Sometimes our feelings aren't going to change in 30 minutes, but would love for you to once more on slide number 5 of the Jamboard, drop your exclamation mark or your question mark. And as you're doing that, I have a feedback form that is separate from the short feedback form y'all are filling out for the folks, because I want to make sure that I'm also growing as the facilitator of this space, but also want to just check what objectives were met here. And there's a space in case you do want me to follow up with any additional information. I'm happy to do that. So that bit.ly is in the chat as well. Really appreciate that additional feedback. I really appreciate y'all for coming to this space. Even you showing up here just shows your care and consideration for all students, but specifically in this space, your foster youth. And so appreciate all that you're doing for all kids, and really want us to think about our students who are showing that lowest graduation rate, like what can we do to change those outcomes so that a kid who enters foster care is more than likely to graduate than the current less than 50% chance of their graduation. So again, go ahead and fill out that bit.ly. And Mike, if you want to drop in the chat one more time the evaluation form, in case anyone missed that earlier, that would be great. Thank you so much. And I will be on for the next few minutes in case anyone wants to stay on, ask any questions. Would appreciate that. I have 2 responses so far to the bit.ly feedback. Again, that's really for my learning and reflection, so would really appreciate your honest reflections there. And then just a reminder to also fill out the evaluation form that Mike shared, since that is how you are getting your full attendance credit for today and for this session. Also appreciate y'all with sticking through to the end of today. I know it's a Saturday, it's the afternoon. I will say it's 103 degrees outside, so you're probably, well, if you're in Clark County, which I know that is the majority of our folks who are participating in the conference, but stay cool or stay warm, and appreciate y'all. Gotten 5 responses so far to that survey, so again, go ahead and fill that out, fill out the evaluation form, and then you can head to the closing. Thanks, Mike, too, for your support. Appreciate it.
No problem. No problem. Yeah. So I encourage everyone to go to the closing session. There would be raffles there that they would be drawn. So, and their basis for the raffles are for attendance in session in the afternoon.
Thanks, Mike. I think that's it for those who are actively here. Thank you.
Thanks too.